A deadly encounter. The silence of deep space was only broken by the occasional beep of the console in Dr. Ethanwell's small spacecraft. The distress signal had been weak, merely lost in the void, but it was enough to catch the attention of the curious scientist. Ethan wasn't one to ignore a cry for help, especially when it came from a barely charted planet like Lixara 9. Known for its lush jungles and strange fauna, the planet had recently become a site of mystery, an outpost wiped out under suspicious circumstances. As Ethan's ship entered Lixara 9's atmosphere, the planet's vibrant greens and blues unfolded before him. The sight was breathtaking, but his focus remained sharp. Landing his craft near the abandoned outpost, he strapped on his oxygen gear and stepped into the unknown. The air was heavy with moisture, and the jungle buzzed with the sounds of alien life. The outpost looked like a ghost town. Crates were overturned, equipment was scattered, and the faint smell of decay lingered in the air. Ethan's boots crunched over broken glass as he approached the main building. A faint moan reached his ears, making him stop in his tracks. Someone was alive. Ethan rushed toward the sound, his heart pounding. Inside the building, he found a man sprawled against a wall, his breathing shallow. The man's skin was pale, his veins darkened with an eerie greenish hue. Ethan knelt beside him, his medical instincts kicking in. "What happened here?" Ethan asked, his voice calm but urgent. The man's eyes fluttered open, panic flashing across his face. She was beautiful," he whispered hoarsely. "But don't trust her. Her touch is death." Before Ethan could ask more, the man's body went limp. Ethan checked for a pulse, but there was none. He sat back, his mind racing. Who was she? And what kind of danger did she pose? As Ethan scanned the room, his gaze fell on a holographic recorder. He activated it, hoping to find answers. The playback showed the outpost's crew laughing and working, until the camera caught sight of a figure stepping out of the jungle. The figure was tall and humanoid, with silvery blue skin that shimmered in the sunlight. Her features were strikingly beautiful, almost otherworldly. The crew seemed enchanted by her, approaching her without hesitation. But then chaos erupted. One by one, the crew members collapsed, clutching their throats and gasping for air. The alien woman's expression twisted with what looked like regret or sorrow before she vanished back into the jungle. Ethan replayed the footage, his curiosity growing. He should have felt fear, but instead he was fascinated. Who was this woman? Why did she look so pained by what she had done? And more importantly, how was her presence so lethal? Determined to find answers, Ethan left the outpost and followed the faint trail leading into the jungle. The lush greenery was dense, and the air grew heavier the deeper he ventured. Every step felt like a gamble, but he pressed on. His scanner beeped, picking up traces of unusual energy signatures. He was getting close. Suddenly, a shadow moved in the distance. Ethan froze. The figure stepped into view, and his breath caught in his throat. It was her, the alien woman from the recording. Her silvery blue skin glowed softly under the filtered sunlight, and her long flowing hair seemed to move like liquid. She looked at him with wide, curious eyes, her expression unreadable. Ethan's instincts told him to turn back, but something about her held him in place. He raised his hands, a universal gesture of peace. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, his voice steady. The woman tilted her head, studying him. When she spoke, her voice was soft and melodic. "You should leave, human. My presence is dangerous." Ethan took a cautious step closer. "I know about the outpost," he said. "I know what happened, but I don't think you wanted to hurt them." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Ethan thought she might attack. But then her shoulders slumped, and she looked away. "You don't understand," she said. "I am cursed. My saliva, it is poison to your kind. I warned them, but they didn't listen. They died because of me." Ethan's mind raced. Her words raised more questions than answers. "If you're so dangerous, why haven't you killed me yet?" he asked, testing the limits of his courage. She looked at him again, her expression tinged with sadness. "I don't know why," she admitted. "You're the first to approach me and live." The revelation sent a chill down Ethan's spine. Why was he immune? Or was he? The jungle around them seemed to hold its breath as the two stared at each other, caught in a tense moment of uncertainty. Ethan knew he was taking a risk by staying, but he also knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning of a mystery far greater than himself. The first meeting. Ethan didn't return to his ship. Instead, he set up a temporary camp near the jungle's edge, his thoughts consumed by the alien woman's cryptic warning and her haunting sadness. He wasn't sure what drove him: curiosity, compassion, or sheer recklessness. But something inside him insisted he had to learn more. She wasn't just a danger. She was a mystery begging to be solved. That night, the jungle came alive with sounds unfamiliar to human ears. Ethan sat by the glow of his portable light, reviewing the data he'd collected at the outpost. The toxin from the deceased crew members' bodies was unlike anything he had encountered before. It wasn't bacterial, viral, or chemical. It was entirely organic, with properties that defied human science. The analysis showed that even a minuscule amount could cause respiratory failure within seconds. Yet here he was, breathing the same air as the woman who produced it, still alive. Why? The thought gnawed at him as the jungle's symphony played on. Suddenly, a new sound broke through, the soft rustle of leaves, deliberate and measured. Ethan's hand instinctively moved to his side, where a compact energy pistol rested in its holster. He didn't draw it, though. Instead, he waited, his heart pounding. She appeared from the shadows like a phantom, her movements graceful and unhurried. The alien woman stepped into the light of his camp, her silvery blue skin catching the soft glow. Her hair, long and shimmering like strands of liquid metal, framed her face, which was both captivating and unreadable. Ethan stood slowly, keeping his hands visible. "You came back," he said, his voice steady despite the tension crackling in the air. "You didn't leave," she replied, her tone calm, but laced with curiosity. "Most would have fled by now, or died." Her words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Ethan gestured toward a small log near the fire. "You can sit, if you'd like." She raised an eyebrow, a gesture that, despite her alien features, felt unmistakably familiar. "You invite death to sit beside you?" she asked. "I don't think you're death," Ethan said. "If you were, I wouldn't still be here." Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't refute him. Instead, she moved closer, her steps cautious yet deliberate. She didn't sit but stood at the edge of the light, studying him with an intensity that made Ethan feel exposed. "You are different," she said finally. "Your kind is fragile, yet you stand here, unafraid." Ethan shrugged, though the tension in his muscles betrayed him. "Maybe I'm just stupid." The corner of her mouth twitched, almost imperceptibly. Was that a smile? He couldn't be sure. "No," she said. "Not stupid. Something else." For a moment, neither spoke. The fire crackled between them, casting flickering shadows on the surrounding trees. Ethan decided to take a chance. "What's your name?" he asked. Her head tilted slightly, as though the question puzzled her. "Lirana," she said after a pause. "And yours?" "Ethan," he replied. "Dr. Ethan Wells. I'm a scientist. A seeker of knowledge," she mused. "Perhaps that explains your foolish bravery. Or my curiosity." Ethan countered. "I want to understand." Lirana's gaze softened, and for a fleeting moment her guard seemed to lower. "You wish to understand what? Why I kill without meaning to? Why I live in exile?" "All of it," Ethan said. "You said you're cursed. I want to know what that means." Lirana turned away, her gaze drifting toward the jungle. "My people were created, not born," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Engineered by another race to be weapons. Our bodies are lethal by design. Even our saliva is poison." Ethan frowned. Created by whom? She shook her head. They are long gone. Their war ended, and they left us behind. Tools they no longer needed. Some of my kind embraced their purpose, reveling in destruction. Others, like me, fled. But no matter where we go, we cannot escape what we are. Her words carried a weight that settled heavily in Ethan's chest. You didn't ask for this, he said softly. No, she agreed. But intention doesn't erase the consequences. Ethan stepped closer, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. There has to be a way to change this. If your body was engineered, it can be understood, maybe even undone. Lixara turned back to him, her expression unreadable. You think you can fix what the gods of war created? She asked, her tone skeptical. I don't know, Ethan admitted, but I think it's worth trying. For a long moment, Lixara said nothing. Then, to Ethan's surprise, she took another step toward him, crossing fully into the light. The air between them felt charged, and Ethan's instincts screamed at him to retreat. But he held his ground. You are not like the others, Lixara said, her voice almost a whisper. Perhaps you are the only one who can try. Ethan nodded, determination hardening in his chest. He didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was clear. His encounter with Lixara was only the beginning of a journey that could change everything. For both of them. A scientist's curiosity. The dawn on Lixara 9 was unlike anything Ethan had ever witnessed. Twin suns rose over the dense jungle, painting the sky in streaks of orange and violet. The air was heavy with moisture, and the scent of alien flora was almost overwhelming. Yet Ethan's mind wasn't on the beauty of the planet. It was on Lixara. She had vanished into the jungle after their brief but intense conversation the night before, leaving Ethan with more questions than answers. His curiosity was burning, an itch he couldn't ignore. Lixara wasn't just a danger. She was a puzzle, a living embodiment of bioengineering that defied everything he knew about science. Inside his makeshift lab, set up in the shadow of his ship, Ethan worked tirelessly. The samples he had taken from the outpost, traces of the toxin left on equipment and the bodies, were unlike anything he'd studied before. Under the microscope, the toxin appeared to be alive, its molecular structure constantly shifting as though adapting to an unseen threat. It wasn't just a poison. It was a weapon designed to ensure death with terrifying efficiency. Created by gods of war, Ethan muttered to himself, echoing Lixara's words. Whoever had engineered her species had crafted them to be unstoppable. But why? And how had those creators vanished without a trace? As he worked, Ethan couldn't help but recall Lixara's expression when she spoke about her past. There had been pain in her eyes, an anguish that made her seem more human than alien. He found himself wondering what it must be like to live as she did, isolated and feared, her very existence a threat to others. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft rustling outside the lab. Ethan froze, his hand instinctively reaching for the energy pistol at his side. The rustling grew louder, and then she appeared. Lixara stepped out of the foliage, her movements graceful despite the dense undergrowth. She carried something in her hands, a bundle of strange, glowing plants. You're persistent, she said, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. Most would have fled after learning the truth. Ethan set his tools aside, standing to face her. I'm not most people, he replied. And you didn't have to come back. Lixara shrugged, her expression unreadable. Curiosity isn't limited to your kind, it seems. She placed the bundle of plants on the table, and Ethan noticed how careful she was to avoid touching anything directly. These are rare, she said. Their sap neutralizes certain toxins. I thought it might help your research. Ethan stared at her, surprised. You're helping me. Lixara tilted her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips. You seem determined to understand me. Perhaps I'm curious about you as well. Ethan carefully examined the plants, their glowing sap emitting a faint hum. This could be a breakthrough, he murmured, excitement bubbling in his chest. If this neutralizes toxins, it might give us a way to counteract your saliva's effects. Lyrana's expression darkened slightly. Do not misunderstand me, Ethan. I do not believe your efforts will change what I am, but it is a small hope. Ethan looked up, meeting her gaze. Hope is enough, he said. It's a start. They worked together, an unlikely pair bound by mutual curiosity. Ethan showed Lyrana how to handle the equipment without risking contamination, while she shared her knowledge of the planet's flora. As they collaborated, a tentative trust began to form, though the tension between them remained. At one point, Ethan asked the question that had been gnawing at him since their first meeting. Why me? Why am I still alive when others weren't? Lyrana hesitated, her silver-blue eyes searching his face. I don't know, she admitted. You are the first human to approach me and survive. Perhaps you are immune, or perhaps it is something else. Ethan frowned, considering her words. Something else. Like what? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked away, her expression thoughtful. Your kind. You act on instincts that defy reason. Even when faced with death, you push forward. Perhaps that is what makes you different. Ethan smiled faintly. We call that stubbornness. Lyrana's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. It may be your greatest strength. As the day wore on, their work yielded unexpected results. The glowing sap did indeed interact with the toxin, breaking it down into harmless compounds. Ethan's excitement grew, but Lyrana remained guarded. This is only one step, she said. Even if you neutralize the toxin in a controlled environment, my body will continue to produce it. It is part of what I am. Then we'll find a way to change that, Ethan said firmly. Lyrana's gaze softened, but she didn't respond. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of something she thought she'd lost. Hope. But with it came fear. Hope, she knew, was a fragile thing, easily shattered. As night fell, Ethan watched Lyrana disappear into the jungle once more. He sat by the fire, staring at the glowing sap in his hands. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he was determined to find answers. For Lyrana, for the outpost, and perhaps for himself. The tragic truth. Ethan had always believed that science could explain everything, that every mystery could be unraveled with the right tools, knowledge, and perseverance. But as he delved deeper into Lyrana's story, he realized there were things that science couldn't quantify. Pain, guilt, and the haunting weight of one's past. The jungle air was thick and damp as he trekked to the place Lyrana had called her refuge. A small clearing surrounded by towering trees that seemed to shield it from the rest of the world. She had agreed to tell him more about her past, but the wariness in her voice hinted that the story would not be an easy one to hear. When Ethan arrived, Lyrana was sitting on a smooth rock near a pool of crystal-clear water, her silver-blue skin reflecting the soft glow of the twin suns. For a moment, she didn't acknowledge him, her gaze fixed on the rippling surface of the pool. Ethan hesitated, unsure if he should approach, but she spoke before he could decide. Do you ever wish you could erase your past? She asked, her voice carrying a melancholy weight. Ethan walked closer, taking a seat on a fallen log across from her. I think everyone has moments they'd rather forget, he said carefully. But erasing the past means erasing what made us who we are. Lyrana's lips curved into a faint, bitter smile. Spoken like someone who hasn't caused the kind of destruction I have. Ethan waited, sensing that she was preparing to share something she had long kept buried. Finally, she turned to him, her silver-blue eyes locking onto his. I told you my kind was created as weapons, she began. But I didn't tell you how that shaped our existence. We were bred for war, our bodies designed to kill with a touch, a kiss, or even a whisper. Our creators called us their living blades. They gave us beauty so we could disarm our enemies, and lethality so we could destroy them. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. You mean you were used to lure people in? Lyrana nodded. Our appearance was a trap. The enemy would approach, drawn by what they thought was harmless or even desirable. By the time they realized the truth, it was too late. Entire battalions fell to a single one of us. She looked away, her gaze distant. I was young when they first sent me into battle. I didn't understand what I was doing. Not fully. I only knew that when I was near others, they died. It was intoxicating at first. The power, the way they looked at me with both fear and awe. But as the years passed, I began to see them differently. They weren't just enemies. They were people. Her voice cracked, and she clenched her fists. I tried to stop. I told my handlers I couldn't do it anymore. But they didn't care. To them, I was a tool, nothing more. When I refused to kill, they turned on me. They sent others like me to hunt me down. Ethan leaned forward, his heart aching for her. You escaped. Barely, she said, her voice a whisper. I fled to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, to places where even my creators wouldn't follow. I thought I could live in peace, but my curse followed me. No matter how careful I was, people still died. My very presence became a plague. Ethan's mind raced as he tried to process her story. It was a horrifying glimpse into a life shaped by cruelty and despair. But you're not a monster, Lixara, he said firmly. You didn't choose this. She laughed bitterly. Intentions mean nothing to the dead, Ethan. The people at the outpost didn't care why I was dangerous. All they knew was that I killed them. Ethan shook his head. You warned them. They didn't listen. Her gaze softened, but her expression remained guarded. You're different, she said. You're still alive. I don't understand why. Ethan hesitated, then decided to share a theory he had been considering. I think my body is reacting to your toxin differently. The analysis I've done shows that it attacks certain proteins in the body. It's possible that I have a genetic mutation that makes me resistant. Lixara tilted her head, intrigued despite herself. You think you're immune? It's a possibility, Ethan admitted, but I won't know for sure until I run more tests. She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. You are the first person who has looked at me and seen more than a weapon, she said quietly. I don't know if I should thank you or pity you. Ethan smiled faintly. Maybe both. For the first time, Lixara allowed herself a small, genuine smile. It was fleeting, but it was enough to give Ethan hope. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to help her. Not just because she was a mystery to solve, but because she deserved a chance at a life free from the shadows of her past. As the suns dipped below the horizon, casting the jungle in hues of gold and crimson, Ethan and Lixara sat in silence, the weight of her story hanging between them. It was a tragic truth, but it was also the foundation of something new. An alliance born not of necessity, but of mutual understanding. A risky experiment. Ethan's makeshift lab buzzed with energy as he worked tirelessly through the night. The glowing sap Lixara had provided was a breakthrough, reacting to her toxin in ways he hadn't anticipated. It was the first glimmer of hope in a puzzle that had seemed insurmountable. But as promising as the results were, they only raised more questions. Could this sap be the key to neutralizing Lixara's lethal biology? And if so, would it be enough to change her life? Or was it merely a temporary solution? Lixara sat on a nearby rock, watching Ethan with a mix of fascination and skepticism. The soft light of the equipment reflected off her silver-blue skin, making her appear almost ethereal. She remained silent as Ethan muttered to himself, running calculations and adjusting his instruments. Finally, she broke the silence. You're relentless, she said. Most people would have given up by now. Ethan glanced at her, a wry smile tugging at his lips. Relentlessness is part of the job description for a scientist. Lixara tilted her head, studying him. And what drives you, Ethan? Is it curiosity, or something more? Ethan paused, the question catching him off guard. He thought about the people at the outpost, the lives lost because no one understood Lixara's nature. He thought about the pain he saw in her eyes, the isolation she endured. It's both, he admitted. Curiosity got me here, but now, Now it's about helping you. You didn't ask for any of this, and if there's a way to change it, I want to try." Lyrana's expression softened, but her voice remained cautious. "And if you fail?" Ethan met her gaze, unwavering. "Then at least we'll know we tried." Her eyes lingered on him for a moment before she nodded. "You're a strange human, Ethan Wells." He grinned. "I'll take that as a compliment." The next phase of his research required a bold step, testing the sap's interaction with Lyrana's toxin in a live environment. Ethan knew it was dangerous, but it was the only way to confirm his theories. He explained the plan to Lyrana as they prepared the necessary equipment. "I'm going to apply a small amount of the toxin to my skin," Ethan said. "Then I'll use the sap to see if it neutralizes the effects." Lyrana's eyes widened in alarm. "That's insane, if you're wrong." "I've run the calculations," Ethan interrupted. "The dosage will be small, and I'll have the antidote ready if something goes wrong." Lyrana's jaw tightened. "You're risking your life for an experiment." "It's not just an experiment," Ethan said, his voice firm. "It's a chance to find answers, to help you." She stared at him, her expression a mix of frustration and something else he couldn't quite place. "You shouldn't care this much," she said quietly. "Maybe not," Ethan replied. "But I do." With that, he began the procedure. He donned protective gloves and carefully extracted a sample of Lyrana's toxin from a vial he had collected earlier. The liquid shimmered faintly, an almost hypnotic reminder of its deadly nature. Ethan removed one glove, exposing a small patch of skin on his forearm. Lyrana stepped closer, her movements hesitant. "You don't have to do this." Ethan looked up at her, his expression calm but resolute. "Yes, I do." Before she could protest further, he dabbed a tiny drop of the toxin onto his arm. The reaction was immediate. His skin reddened, and a burning sensation spread outward from the contact point. Ethan gritted his teeth, his breathing shallow as he fought through the pain. "Ethan." Lyrana's voice was sharp with concern. "I'm fine," he managed, though his voice was strained. He reached for the sap and applied a small amount to the affected area. The burning sensation began to subside almost instantly, and the redness faded. Lyrana watched in stunned silence as Ethan flexed his fingers, examining his arm. "It worked," he said, a note of triumph in his voice. The sap neutralized the toxin. Relief flashed across Lyrana's face, but it was quickly replaced by anger. "You're reckless," she snapped. "Do you have any idea how close you came to proving that there's hope?" Ethan interrupted. "Yes, I do." Lyrana glared at him, but the fire in her eyes softened. "You're insufferable," she muttered. "And you're welcome," Ethan replied with a grin. Despite her irritation, Lyrana couldn't deny the significance of the moment. For the first time, there was tangible evidence that her curse might be manageable, if not curable. She felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. As the adrenaline faded, Ethan sank into a chair, exhaustion washing over him. "This is just the beginning," he said, his voice tired but determined. "We've got a lot more work to do." Lyrana nodded, her gaze steady. "Then let's not waste any more time." The two of them returned to the lab, their partnership now stronger than ever. For the first time, it felt like they were on the verge of something extraordinary, a discovery that could change everything, not just for Lyrana, but for the countless lives her story had yet to touch. A desperate gamble. Ethan barely slept that night. The experiment with the sap had been a success, but the victory felt hollow. It was a small step forward, but it wasn't enough. The toxin was still part of Lyrana's biology, an ever-present threat that couldn't be neutralized permanently with just a glowing plant. They needed a real solution, a way to alter her body's fundamental chemistry. As dawn broke over the jungle, Ethan sat by the fire, poring over his notes. The problem wasn't just scientific, it was personal. The more he worked with Lyrana, the more he saw her as someone who deserved a life free from fear and isolation. And for reasons he couldn't fully explain, he was willing to risk everything to make that happen. The sound of footsteps broke his train of thought. Ethan looked up to see Lixara approaching. She moved with her usual grace, but her expression was tense, her silver-blue eyes sharp and focused. "You haven't slept," she said, sitting down across from him. Ethan shrugged. "I couldn't stop thinking about the next step." Lixara raised an eyebrow. "You humans have an unhealthy relationship with overwork." He smirked. "And you aliens have an unhealthy relationship with toxins." Her lips twitched in a faint smile, but the humor faded quickly. "What's the next step, then?" Ethan hesitated, unsure how she would react to what he was about to propose. "We need to test something more ambitious," he said. "The sap works on external exposure, but it's not a permanent fix. To change your biology, we need to introduce it directly into your system." Lixara's expression darkened. "You mean injecting it?" Ethan nodded. "It's risky, but it's the only way to see if the sap can counteract the toxin at its source." For a long moment, Lixara said nothing. Her gaze drifted to the fire, her thoughts clearly racing. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but laced with apprehension. "What happens if it doesn't work?" Ethan met her eyes, his expression serious. "There's a chance your body could reject it. But there's also a chance it could work. If we don't try, we'll never know." Lixara leaned back, her gaze searching his face. "You're asking me to gamble with my life." "I'm not asking," Ethan said gently. "This has to be your choice. But I believe it's worth the risk." The jungle seemed to hold its breath as Lixara considered his words. Finally, she nodded. "Do it." Ethan got to work immediately, preparing the injection with meticulous care. He concentrated the sap's active compound into a serum, ensuring the dosage was small enough to minimize the risk, but potent enough to have an effect. Lixara watched him in silence, her expression unreadable. When everything was ready, Ethan looked at her. "Are you sure about this?" She nodded, her voice firm. "If this has a chance to change my life, I'm willing to take it." Ethan guided her to sit on a makeshift medical table he had fashioned from sturdy crates. Her skin shimmered faintly in the morning light, a reminder of the strange beauty that made her both captivating and dangerous. "This might sting," Ethan warned as he swabbed her arm with an antiseptic. Lixara smirked faintly. "I've endured worse." Ethan inserted the needle carefully, injecting the serum into her vein. The process was quick, but the tension in the room was palpable. As soon as he withdrew the needle, Lixara winced, a sharp intake of breath escaping her lips. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked, his voice tight with concern. "It burns," she said through gritted teeth. "Like fire in my veins." Ethan grabbed his scanner, monitoring her vitals. Her heart rate was elevated, and her body temperature was rising, but nothing indicated immediate danger. "Your body is reacting to the serum," he said. "That's expected, but we need to keep an eye on it." Minutes stretched into hours as they waited. Lixara's discomfort gradually subsided, replaced by an intense fatigue. Ethan stayed by her side, monitoring her condition and taking notes on every change. "It feels different," Lixara said finally, her voice weak but steady, "like something inside me is shifting." Ethan's scanner beeped, displaying data that made his heart leap. "Your toxin levels are dropping," he said, barely able to contain his excitement. "The serum is working." Lixara's eyes widened. "You're sure?" "I'm seeing it in real time," Ethan confirmed. "Your body is neutralizing the toxin. It's not gone yet, but this is a huge step." For the first time, Lixara allowed herself to hope. She smiled, a small, hesitant smile, but it was real. "You actually did it." "We did it," Ethan corrected, his own smile matching hers. The moment was short-lived, however. The scanner beeped again, this time with a warning tone. Ethan's heart sank as he read the data. "Your immune system is overreacting," he said. "It's treating the serum like a threat." Lixara's smile faded. "What does that mean?" "It means we're not out of the woods yet," Ethan said. I need to stabilize your system before it rejects the serum entirely." He moved quickly, preparing a counter-serum to calm her immune response. Lyrana watched him with a mixture of trust and apprehension. "You said this was a gamble," she murmured. "I guess we'll see if it pays off." Ethan injected the counter-serum, holding his breath as he monitored her vitals. Slowly, the warning tones on the scanner stopped, and Lyrana's condition stabilized. Relief washed over him like a tidal wave. "It's working," he said, his voice trembling with exhaustion. "You're going to be okay." Lyrana closed her eyes, a single tear escaping down her cheek. "Thank you, Ethan," she whispered, "for not giving up on me." Ethan sat beside her, his own exhaustion catching up to him. They had taken a desperate gamble, but for the first time, it felt like the odds might finally be in their favor. The unlikely bond. The jungle seemed quieter than usual that evening, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. Ethan sat on a makeshift bench outside his camp, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the twin suns were setting. Their golden light bathed the lush greenery in hues of amber and crimson, but his mind was far from the beauty around him. Inside the camp, Lyrana rested on the medical table, her breathing steady but shallow. It had been 2 days since the risky serum injection, and the results were nothing short of miraculous. Her toxin levels had dropped to nearly undetectable levels, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't a walking threat to everything around her. But the process had taken a toll, leaving her body weak as it adjusted to the changes. Ethan glanced at the scanner in his hand, the data confirming what his eyes already saw. She was stabilizing. Relief washed over him, but it was tempered by exhaustion. He hadn't slept properly in days, too worried about what might go wrong. Yet now that the worst seemed to be over, he couldn't ignore the deeper questions swirling in his mind. What did this mean for Lyrana's future? For their tenuous bond? Lost and fought again. The voice startled him. Ethan turned to see Lyrana standing in the doorway of the camp. She leaned against the frame, her silver-blue skin catching the last rays of sunlight. Though she still looked tired, her posture was steadier, her eyes brighter. "You should be resting," Ethan said, standing quickly. Lyrana smirked, a faint but genuine expression. "I've done enough resting. Besides, I needed to see the sunset." Ethan gestured for her to sit beside him, and she accepted, lowering herself carefully onto the bench. For a moment, they sat in silence, watching as the sky shifted from gold to deep indigo. "How do you feel?" Ethan asked eventually. "Different," Lyrana admitted. "It's strange. My body feels lighter, as if a weight I didn't know I was carrying has been lifted. But more than that, it's quiet." Ethan frowned. "Quiet?" She nodded, her gaze distant. "The toxin, it was always there, like a hum in the back of my mind. I never noticed it until it was gone. Now, for the first time, I feel normal." The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. For someone like Lyrana, who had spent her entire life as a living weapon, normal was a concept that had always been out of reach. "That's good," Ethan said softly. "That's what we wanted." She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "What about you, Ethan? What do you want?" The question caught him off guard. He hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I wanted to help you," he said finally, "to give you a chance at a life that isn't defined by fear and isolation." Lyrana studied him, her silver-blue eyes searching his face. "And now that you've done that?" Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Now, I don't know. I didn't think this far ahead." She smiled faintly. "You're not very good at thinking small, are you?" "Not really," he admitted with a chuckle. They fell into a companionable silence, the soft chirping of alien insects filling the air. For the first time since they met, the tension between them had eased, replaced by something neither could quite define. It wasn't just relief or gratitude. It was a connection, fragile but undeniable. "You risked everything for me," Lyrana said suddenly, her voice quiet but firm. "Why?" Ethan hesitated again, then decided to be honest. Because you deserve a chance to live, just like anyone else. And because I didn't want to lose you. Lyrana's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, she seemed at a loss for words. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. You're the first person who's ever said that to me. Ethan looked at her, his heart aching at the vulnerability in her expression. Then it's about time someone did. The moment stretched between them, charged with an unspoken understanding. Lyrana reached out, her hand hovering just above his. I've spent my entire life avoiding contact, she said. But now. Ethan didn't move, giving her the choice. Slowly, tentatively, she let her fingers brush against his. The touch was featherlight, but it sent a shock through both of them. For Lyrana, it was the first time she touched someone without fear. For Ethan, it was the culmination of everything they'd worked for. It doesn't hurt, she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. Ethan smiled. No, it doesn't. For the first time, Lyrana allowed herself to hope, not just for survival, but for connection. And as the twin moons rose over the jungle, casting their soft light over the two of them, it felt like the beginning of something new, something neither of them had dared to dream of before.